get so far into this before you realized? I just don't understand.
Yeah, or before you even like broached the conversation.
Access denied. Access denied. Access denied.
Hey y'all, it's your host Jessica Jordan, and I'm here on Access Denied, the podcast dedicated to helping you get over your fear of rejection, one episode at a time. Let's go! Hi friends, and welcome to a brand new episode of Access Denied. I hope you're excited because I know I sure as heck am, because today I am joined by Allie Cameron, who is the founder of Seated Perspectives. Allie's mission with Seated Perspectives is to help disabled women find financial freedom and accessibility in the work that they do. And so, as you can imagine, a big part of our conversation had to do with inaccessible experiences at work and even in school. There's a lot of tea to spill, friends, so I hope you will stay tuned and enjoy this week's episode. Let's dive in. Allie, welcome to Access Denied. Thank you so much for being here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting to be part of the conversation. And yeah, I'm so glad to be here.
Well, I am so freaking pumped that our paths connected recently. It's going to be such a fun conversation. Why don't you start by introducing everybody to who you are and what you do?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Allie Cameron. I'm a disability advocate running the Seated Perspectives account on Instagram. I am also a content marketer and writer. I've been running a freelance business for about 3 years, and I'm now expanding into a whole new world of business where I'm helping other disabled folks, particularly disabled women, just refine what their branding looks like, help them start new projects. And it's been a really fun ride so far.
Love everything that you just said. I have one comment and one question off of what you just said. Number one, I love your accent. It's so fun.
Thank you.
It's like a fun mix of like British and Canadian and American. It's a blend.
It is. My mom calls it a transatlantic accent. So it comes from, well, I grew up in Argentina, so that's a big thing, which shouldn't influence the accent in this way. But I grew up within the British community there, and they have, I'd say, even an older English accent than like the Brits do. So it's quite like colonial English that influences that. And then my mom's Canadian, and I've been in Canada since I was 15. So yeah, it's a whole blend of stuff.
I adore it. It's amazing. I could listen to you speak all day. Maybe you should be the one driving this conversation.
Thanks. I mean, there's a podcast down the line somewhere, but yeah, not yet.
I also want to hear more about your childhood and like all of that. But before that, I want to hear how you came up with Seated Perspectives, because I think that is such a unique name.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. The journey with Seated Perspectives started 2.5 years ago at this point. And I don't know, I was looking for something that would like encapsulate where I was coming from and like my unique view of the world. And it sort of just hit me. And then I was like, all right, let's see if it's available. Let's see if I have like somewhere to go with this. And I was really lucky in that there wasn't there's some use of the name. There's, I think, a pair in the UK who've used it sort of briefly, but didn't really go from there. So I was like, all right, here we go. Let's start and play. And yeah, and it sort of fit me quite well. And I mean, it just sort of relates to the fact that I've really thought about it as a brand from the very beginning. So even when I was very much in my imposter syndrome era and like just playing and seeing what would happen, I was still very much thinking about it as a brand. So I knew it had to have a name. I wanted sort of colors and fonts to go with it, but also just a true identity behind what I was doing.
I love it so much. I think people's like origin stories with their names, like for especially like social media people that like post online and whatnot, when they don't have their actual name, I'm like, everybody has a story. Everybody has a story. And so that's why I had to ask. But yes, okay. Yeah. That's exciting. And especially congrats on 2.5 years of being in business. That's exciting.
Yeah. Seated Perspectives, started October 2022. And there is an origin story behind like starting to post online. If you want to hear that, I can tell you that. But yeah, it very much came from, it was, I don't know. I think it was sort of a fluke, but I don't know. Flukes aren't really flukes to me. I feel like we do things because we're ultimately meant to do them. But I started by coming out of a job that just like showed me again how little people think about accessibility when it comes to corporate settings. And like I'd only been at the job, I was only there for 4 months. Like it just ended up not being the right fit for me. It was a client that I had been freelancing with that I went full-time with for a while. And it was just like, oh, we're going to plan this like summer bash event for the whole company. And there's going to be beach volleyball. And I'm like, what? Excuse me? And I mean, just like a few moments like that just sort of put that all to light for me again after having been freelancing for a year. And then I sort of sat and was like, okay, this isn't the first time this has happened to me. Like I have been in multiple corporate settings, and in most, if not all of those environments, I've had to compromise in some way or another on my comfort, on my access needs, on a whole bunch of things, even my dignity in some cases, to still like show up and be a productive member of the workforce. And as like most disabled folks, showing up and like being more than just productive, like being overachievers, because that's how we distract from our disability and the quote unquote burden that we place on the workforce by being disabled. So I sort of reached a bubbling point and like wrote all my grievances out in a post on LinkedIn and like listed all the things that I had ever compromised on or the situations that I had been through in workplaces, from like having my boss's boss ask if they could have a ride on my lap to like much smaller things like lack of, well, it's not small, to lack of like properly accessible washrooms and stuff that like I've compromised on and probably didn't say anything at the time. In fact, rarely said anything at the time because again, we conform. And I wrote the post and I published it and it was nerve-wracking as all hell, but the response was really impressive. Like I had a lot of people who had been in my network forever who reached out and were like, whoa, I never knew you went through that stuff. And I was like, okay, there's more I can say here. Like, there's a hell of a lot more that I can say here. And it was sort of a bit of a self-reflexive moment of being like, okay, I'm actually not talking about this stuff. And probably because I don't want to make people uncomfortable. But maybe I should be talking about this stuff. And it's not just about me. It's so that these non-disabled folks can show up better for any other disabled folks that they come across or that are in their lives already. And that sort of, spurred the, maybe I need to be showing up a bit more. Like I've got the communication skills, I've got the writing skills. Maybe I need to channel that into something that I know is really important. And and that's how Seated Perspectives sort of started.
Again, a wonderful origin story. I love to hear it. But at the same time, like, I'm sorry that it was based in so much ableism. And like, that's what it is at the end of the day. It's straight up discrimination. And I think
for sure
we need to call that out for being exactly what it is. Because it sucks having to put yourself in oftentimes dangerous positions for yourself. And beyond that too, just like constantly having to work harder. People don't realize that when workplaces are not accessible, you're not just being asked to do your job. You're being asked to do your job plus like 25%. Sometimes maybe even plus like 100%, depending on how big the workaround needs to be. And that just like is not okay for so many reasons. And so that's why I really love what you're doing. And I think more places obviously need your help, need the help of disabled people, and need to hear these lived experiences to be able to do better by us and themselves.
Yeah, 100%. It really, I think, also speaks to the internalized ableism that a lot of us hold, and how, as disabled folks, like we just accept all these basic forms of ableism because we feel like we need to fit in and we need to contribute in the same way as other folks. And like, I don't know how it is that we've normalized the fact. I don't know how I normalized the fact that it was okay that my office in at least 2 different work settings, my office was not on the same floor as a bathroom. It was an accessible bathroom. And I'm like, and then there were unreliable elevators and like, and like the emotional labor that comes with that and just the logistical labor that comes with that. I try to put myself in the mindset of the me that accepted that. Obviously, like having enough compassion for myself to know that it's systemic, to know that it's like, it's how we're taught to exist is like by compromising our comfort, compromising our needs. But it's baffling to me now. And it's baffling to me that I spent like 16 years doing that only to recently be like, actually, no. Like my comfort is worth a hell of a lot more than that. It's worth a hell of a lot more than a job. And I mean, I think that's ultimately the primary reason why I'm so eager to stay freelancing and running my own business, because it's the most accessible work environment I've ever had. So, like, why would I give that up?
There are several things that are coming to mind based on everything you just said. And I think the first one being, isn't it sad that so many disabled people find themselves needing to fall back into freelancing, needing to fall back into owning their own business? Because, first of all, getting a job as a disabled person is an actual nightmare of an experience. But like, then making that job work for you is just such a pain in the ass, to put it like very bluntly. So that's unfortunate. And then I just think, sorry, I had to shift because this is a serious conversation. I just think that we as a society have so much to work on. And like the fact that like this is across country lines too. You're in Canada. I'm in the US. I've lived in the UK. I've seen it everywhere. When I was in the UK, I applied for a job. This is a story. I don't think I've told this on the internet before. I applied for a full-time job, got like so far into the process. It was like the final interviews. And very clearly on my resume, it talks about the fact that I run my own thing. Like I'm the rolling explorer. I talk about disability online. It's my lived experience. It's in my cover letter. And I talked about it throughout the interview process too. And then we get to the final interview and they're like, okay, so we have a problem. Our office is not wheelchair accessible.
What?
I looked at them. I'm like, so what's the solution here? They said, well, we were wondering if you could wear your prosthetic, and because it was a hybrid position, so I'd go in 2 days a week. And they said we would fund for a taxi to bring you to and from the office on the 2 days you'd have to be in a week. And I was like, number one, you're never going to hire me over the next person knowing that you're going to have that extra expense every week. So like, I knew I was out in that instance, which sucks. But it's just like, well, how did we get so far into this before you realized? I just don't understand.
Yeah. Or before you even like broached the conversation to say like, hey, before we go any further, these are the, like, this is the reality of our office setup. We want to make sure that that's something that could work for you. If not, we're so sorry, but this isn't going to be the right fit. Or like, we want to make sure we're not wasting your time to like, and effort and energy to go through this whole interview process. Like, what? That's bananas to me.
I was so mad.
And the thing is, like, there's such a big debate for like disabled folks who are applying for jobs on whether to disclose or not, because there is that concern that it takes you out of the running. But like, you actually disclosed, and like, we're really proactive in sharing that information. And it's wild. That's wild to me. Ugh.
I do struggle. I wonder, what's your take on that? Do you think disabled people should disclose, or do you think disabled people shouldn't disclose?
I mean, I think the only time I didn't from the very beginning was actually, I think the way I've done it is that I don't disclose in like my resume and cover letter and such unless it's pertinent to the role, obviously. But I haven't disclosed in the very initial screening stage. But then if it ever comes, because my disability is purely physical, if it ever comes to a point where it's like leading to an in-person interview, then I will disclose and say, hey, by the way, I'm a wheelchair user. And that's what this means. I mean, now that would be quite different because anywhere on my social media, even on my LinkedIn, I'm like very vocal about the fact that I'm a disability advocate. So it's like, well, not much hiding it. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it very much depends on the interview process, I think, to start, just because ultimately that's the only thing that's really impacting your ability to show up. But I think it's important to disclose at some point in the conversation, because it's also an opportunity for you to evaluate how that company or organization responds. Because you're evaluating them too. At the end of the day, like, you want to be able to work in a place that is comfortable, that allows you to show up in your best possible ability, and to be able to bring your unique perspective and all the benefits that come with employing a disabled individual. So yeah, I don't know. To me, it's very much dependent on the person and the individual and the situation, but I think at some point in the conversation, it's worth doing.
I agree with that. I think it depends on the disability in many ways too.
Sure.
I say the same thing about dating. Like, I wouldn't necessarily put it on my dating profile, but I would put it like in conversation, like sometime early on where it would be relevant, maybe a first or second interview, depending on the situation. But ideally not the final one. Maybe not that one.
No. Yeah, particularly if you're hoping to request certain accommodations, I think at that point, leaving it too far ultimately makes for an uncomfortable or awkward situation. Like, you don't want anyone to be surprised, I think is sort of the metric I like to go with. And again, you're evaluating their response, and that's important too. But I think you can sense where the middle ground is as to where it makes sense to have that conversation.
I agree. Another overarching theme that I love from this entire conversation in many ways too is the way that, like, disabled people just aren't putting up with it anymore. Like, the positive angle of, like, people becoming their own business owners and people, like, stepping out of corporate settings is they're taking their power back. They're like, I'm not dealing with the discomfort. I'm not dealing with the discrimination. I'm going to set up my own success story, and I'm going to kick ass at it. And guess what, man? Like, that's a beautiful thing at the end of the day.
It is. It is really cool to see. I mean, like, you're someone I've followed for ages, and, like, I love the presence that you've built, but there's so many of us. And I don't know, obviously we're in our own pocket of the internet, and it's a beautiful pocket to be in. But as we go expanding, as I see people's, like, share someone's post that I'm like, oh yeah, I followed her for 2 years, like, but cool that she's making it to the mainstream now, or that she's, like, caught wind of someone else's attention. But I don't know, I love what this community is building individually and beyond. And yeah, it's like you said, it's like we're tired of waiting for the other shoe to drop on the corporate side. It's like, we know what the benefits are of you hiring us. Like I know for a fact what the benefits are of people hiring me, but I'm tired of compromising. Like, it just doesn't make sense for me anymore. And sure, maybe there'll be a job opportunity down the line where I happen to find an organization that's, like, fully aligned with my needs. And I mean, maybe I'll get tired down the line of running my own thing. Who knows? But it's not in the near future. But for now, like I said before, this is the most accessible work environment I've ever had. And I've had to unlearn a few things to make it work for me and for it to be what it is now. But I mean, I'm honestly, like, happier and more in tune with myself than I have ever been. So why wouldn't I want to try and help other disabled folks, like, make that same reality for themselves?
And I love that. And I think at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're giving people their power back, right? Because I know, like, I look at my own job and my own, like, way that I show up on the internet, right? And it's very, I'll be really transparent, it's very inconsistent. There are some months that are really prosperous, and there are some that are not. And so I think throughout my journey as an entrepreneur online and as, like, a content creator in particular, I've always sort of passively, that's not a word, passively been looking at like full-time work. Even right now, especially right now with everything changing here in the United States. So we're recording this on Inauguration Day, which
Woohoo!
love.
Joy.
Excellent. really lucky if you for that one. But beyond that, like TikTok is getting banned. Like the environment is changing and like things are moving at a pace that like you can't predict the future. You can't control what's going to happen. And so to me, like I've been passively applying for full-time work for about like a few weeks now in preparation for this, just since the beginning of the year. And now the thing that my presence outside of a corporate setting and being able to monetize the work that I do is beneficial is it gives me the power to not jump at the first opportunity. Yeah. I'm able to look at what is actually going to be accessible, what's going to fit into the lifestyle that I lead right now, but I think also more importantly that like I want to build to, and that so like from a professional standpoint, but also from a comfort and accessibility standpoint. And I think those are both the keys. And that's what you're giving people by helping them build their own brands, by helping them rise to whatever they want to do. You're giving them financial freedom to be able to have the power to design their ideal accessible life. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think about that a lot. And obviously, like having that security blanket, having that, I mean, financial support, it comes with a lot of privilege. Like I think it's important to note that within the disability community, there are a lot of different experiences in terms of whether you do have the space and the comfort and the time to choose a job that is comfortable and accessible. Like I know that's a privilege. I completely understand it. And for me, the goal is to try and get more people to that space, to access that little bit of privilege that gives them the room, the space, the breathing room, because like it's what we deserve at the very least. I'm trying to envision a world where more people can do that and where we can take more control while companies catch up and organizations catch up and really start implementing the things that would make life at work better for us.
I'm glad you brought up that note. I think that's a really important caveat to this conversation is that idea that everybody has different experiences and kind of, as we were saying at the beginning, like your ability to disclose if you have a disability or not depends on the disability in many ways too. But like, I think some people have more extreme disabilities than others, and that's going to impact the way that they work. It's going to impact what they can do and the time, the energy that they have to bring financial freedoms into their life, essentially. 100%.
Yeah, exactly. And in Canada, it's such an interesting dynamic too, because like, even if you do choose to become a content creator and become successful at it, like in TikTok, we don't get to monetize our work. So we don't have access to monetization through TikTok. So it's like, it does take that extra, lift to actually sort of find contracts and relationships and stuff. So, I mean, that's a big part of why I kept my freelance work and still do. Like I have 3 freelance clients for writing that I keep on the side just to be able to have that base income so that I can play and discover and like build other opportunities with the work that I'm doing. And again, that comes with a wealth of privilege of like the access to work that I do have and the relationships that I have. So yeah, it's an interesting space to be in. So for me, it's like I'm trying to equip people to show up in a really sort of buttoned up and consistent and recognizable way, because then that's a way that people build relationships with you and engage with you, and like helping them really line up their goals to the content they're creating. But it's super interesting also, like the people that I've coached so far range so much in like their experience. Like I've worked with people who are very much at the start of their journey when it comes to either content creation or just starting something new. And then there are people who have been around for a while and who have a presence. And I think what's actually really fascinating is that working with them and getting on a call with them, and I'm almost like fangirling a bit, And then they still have the same imposter syndrome that I do. And I'm like, oh no, what are we doing to like disabled women that like they're not feeling good enough? And again, it's systemic. And again, it's like based entirely around the ecosystem of social media as a whole and the room that we take up as disabled folks, and how a lot of the time we're still like people to point and stare at, or we're still the ones who are like coming up as inspiration porn. And it's really interesting to see how each individual creator or speaker or whatever it is that they're doing to show up, how they hold that internally and how that impacts their own perception of their own work, despite how like everyone else in the community would tell them how important it is. It's still like, yeah, they hold it very tenuously and very gingerly and very like I worked very closely with Lucy Webster, who's based in the UK and who's like such a phenomenal advocate and author and journalist. And like to see her like be self-conscious about like how she's showing up in her work was so baffling to me. And I don't know, it's something else that I want to keep exploring and like seeing how I can keep holding other disabled women up, because they're so like we are so epic. And I think we all need to know it and own it a bit more and show up as confidently as a white man who has no leg to stand up.
You know, this podcast is called Access Denied. Like one of the big themes of it is rejection. And one thing that comes up across almost every episode in some way is the idea of self-rejection. And that's essentially what imposter syndrome is. You're getting in your way and you're telling yourself like, oh, why do I deserve this? I shouldn't be here. This isn't for me. And you're counting yourself out before anybody else even can. Yeah. And the thing is, like, I am very privileged in the sense, like, I have been in the creator space now for 5 years, and I've met a lot of people in the space, and disabled and non-disabled, and it's fascinating how deep the self-rejection, the imposter syndrome is, particularly for women. Obviously, men experience it too, and I'm not trying to discredit that, like, as a whole, because I do, like, I've met people on both sides of the coin that are very self-conscious about the way they're showing up online, very self-conscious about how they're showing up in person versus how they're showing up online. And that,
interesting.
That is across gender, 100%. But I think women in general have a much more like, I don't deserve to be here. I feel so grateful to be here. And disabled women take it a step further, like, I can't even believe I was invited here. Like, you know, like, and it comes down to, I can't even believe they reached out to me. Even if they can't access a space. I've seen that happen before too. Like, oh, I got invited to this event, but I couldn't go because it wasn't accessible. But I'm so grateful they reached out. I've seen that. I know. And I'm like, these are the levels of like, that we have to break through. We have to like, this is a lot.
It is a lot. It is a lot. I feel like for me, for so long, I was so driven to show up in places. Like, I'm thinking school, university, work. Like, I was just certain that I deserved to be there. And I don't, like, it's interesting because, like, I didn't have a very strong relationship with my disability at the time. I still had a lot of shame at the time. But me as a person, I knew I deserved to be places. And so I think how I got there often meant compromising on a lot, because I was so determined to be there. And I think that's where my internalized ableism played in a lot. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what point I'm trying to make here, but it's just like, we have such an interesting relationship with our bodies and with our psyches, and whether we've grown up with a disability and had it forever, or had a traumatic incident that led to it, or whatever it might be, like, it's so dynamic. And it's interesting to sort of see it play out in similar ways in terms of how we relate to our bodies and how we like show up and experience it and how we see our own self-worth, but how all those stories are so different despite the fact that we arrive at the same place. It's, I don't know. There's so much that I want to like explore. in terms of people's stories. And I think that's something that I'll be doing more of down the line. I have this idea that I want to write a book on disabled joy and just talk to different people and their experiences of joy, because I still think that that's a narrative that's not talked about enough. But like, what does the journey look like to get to a place where you can experience joy too? Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot there.
I love disabled joy, and I think, I mean, it's not mainstream, right? And that's the problem. I think you said it earlier, like we created like our own little corner of the internet, but like the negative word for that is an echo chamber. Like we're all like just preaching to each other all the time, which is in some ways good, right? Because like I know where I grew up in a very small town in the middle of Illinois. I just didn't see myself ever like represented anywhere, and I didn't know what was even possible for me. Like I remember talking to friends and being like, well, I'll probably never get married one day because like I've never seen somebody like me in a loving relationship, and that's its own can of worms for another day. But like that's kind of the point. Like it if you don't have that visual like inspiration, and I know disabled people hate that word,
no, but
understandably so, but like it's important as like a young person, and even as an adult, we look to that.
100%. I mean, I think I mentioned before, like it took me sort of 16 years to get to a place where I was like comfortable in my own skin post my injury, but it also took me that long to even start following disabled folks on social media and like start engaging with the community. Like I very actively didn't. I regret that now, but I understand why I didn't. And just the act of being in conversation with folks, seeing their own stories and having those stories reflect back my own experiences was such a powerful thing. Like my adult self is forever changed because of it. But I mean, I also imagine like what it could have been like for me aged 14 when I had my injury to see that. Like I didn't have anything like that. And even before my injury too, like how awesome would it have been for my first experience with disability or contact with disability should not have been my own body. Like, but instead to have seen other stories and see them play out joyfully and beautifully and known that was possible from the get-go.
I very much feel that because I didn't even really understand that the disability community was a community until I was 22 years old. I just feel like so many missed opportunities from my teenage years to like feel accepted and be more confident in who I am and showing up and existing. Crazy.
Just being. Like,
what a concept.
Yeah. I know, right? Like just being able to be that's nice.
I do want to hear about your experience in school though, because that was something that I know you've been talking about online quite a bit. I would love to hear more about, because you said that you always knew that you deserved to be in spaces. And I think that's a really powerful statement. And I want to hear how that like worked within your school experience.
Yeah. I mean, I think it very much just relates to how everything happened. I mean, sorry, that sounds like a big statement, but it's just like when I was first injured, age 14, it was 2 weeks before I was meant to go to boarding school. So I was already set and ready and like scheduled to go, and then had my accident. We were on a family skiing trip in Argentina, and I had my accident, and it was very much like almost like at the beginning of COVID, where I was like, oh, it's 2 weeks, I'll be fine. Like, I'll be fine, I'll be ready to go. And of course, that was not the case. But from the very beginning, it was very much like, okay, we're not going this year, but we'll get you set up to go next year. So like me going to boarding school halfway across the world or up the continent was the driver behind a lot of my rehabilitation, a lot of like that. It was the goal. Like that was the line that we were aiming towards. with with my rehabilitation, with getting me set up to understand what it was like to navigate in a wheelchair, to do all these things. And so I got injured August 2005. And September 2006, I was in boarding school in Canada, away from home, very far away from home. And yeah, so I think that drive was innate to me. Like, I've talked about this in therapy enough to be able to acknowledge that I probably innately had a lot of drive already, and that's probably what saved me. But it was also just situationally, it was very much there from the beginning. And I was like, okay, so I'm going to go and I'm going to be part of this school. And yeah, I've started talking about it recently on social media because I can now look back on it and be like, okay, there were some things there that weren't particularly great. And while I was there, for the 3 years I was there, I think I shouldered a lot of the responsibility to make sure I was fitting in, to make sure I was participating, to make sure I was a successful student. And I was, and I'm glad for that. But it came with a lot of costs of comfort again, and that's the same theme that I took into university and work. I think it was a taught thing for me, but also at the cost of me not existing with a lot of shame. I had a lot of shame that I carried with me throughout all 3 years there, and couple that with regular teenage angst and heartbreak, and trying to put myself out there for boys who are stupid at that age, very, and also not being able to articulate at the time that a lot of the adults who should have been taking care of me and more care of me didn't do enough to do that. And I think they might all say that they didn't know how to, or that they didn't have the capability to, or that they were stretched. This was all new to them as well, having a boarding student who was disabled. But I was the one that was 15. And they were the adults in the picture. So it's yeah, okay, sure. It was all new, but you had the skills and the knowledge to maybe we can go find more information, or maybe we can find community for Allie to exist in, or any number of things. And I know that I was sort of I'm a force to be reckoned with sometimes. I know when I get stubborn and determined, I don't let a lot of things in. But that could also have been looked at as okay, maybe we need to try a softer approach, or maybe there's room to find another way to have this conversation. And that was never done. It was sort of very much, it's interesting because I look back at my time there and I label myself as a bit difficult. And that's heartbreaking to me now, because I know that how else would I have reacted? Of course I reacted that way. It's completely understandable. But yeah, I think I missed a lot of softness in that time too.
So many powerful statements made. When you look back on that time and you label yourself as difficult, when I was in school, I was labeled as difficult.
Yeah.
100%. Administration, teachers were definitely mad at me because of the accessibility accommodations I asked for. And so hearing that, that resonates a lot.
Yeah.
But also hearing you say I get in the sense, and you get in a sense, it's the first time that these adults are dealing with a disabled student. It's the first time that they've had to make these accommodations. And change for anybody, I think everybody can agree to this. Change for anybody at any point in time, especially if you've always done something a certain way, is challenging. It is something that takes work. But you were the one that was 15.
Yeah.
You were the one that was 15.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's I was a child. Let's be clear. And yeah, I mean, it's I said, it's taken me a long time to unpack all of that and to realize it wasn't all on me. which is, but then it's like, oh, of course I learned to like go with the flow and make myself small or make my disability small, like not make it the focus. Like, of course I did. Like, what else would I have learned from that scenario, right? Like, yeah, it's kind of heartbreaking.
That right there is why I always say to people that don't necessarily identify as being a part of the disability community, but who benefit from accessibility measures or who would benefit from accommodations that aren't necessarily accessibility based, but like just in general, ask for them. That is one of the best ways you can be an ally, is to get used to asking for the things that you need.
Yeah.
Make it normal. That is truly, make it normal to need things. Make it normal to have needs.
Yeah.
Simply. Is that?
Exactly.
It's not that hard.
It's not. It's just like normalizing things, I think, is so important. And it's funny because I've gone back to the school now, I think a year or so ago, a couple of years ago, maybe, to like, because I wanted to address their school motto, and you're going to love this when you hear it. So the school motto is in Latin, but it translates to a sound mind in a sound body. So yeah, there was a lot else to like try and wear that on my shirt, like on the sweaters, on everything. It was always written there. And I'm like, but I don't qualify. And now I'm like, who the hell is determining what sound mind and sound body is? But like, maybe change that.
Does anybody have a fully sound mind or body?
Well, exactly. Like, what is it?
What is it?
Define that for me.
Please, because the longer you live, the more shit that happens. Like, you're gonna scrape your knee, you're gonna get a cold, you're gonna probably have some trauma at some point. I have so many thoughts on that. That's a lot to unpack.
Oh yeah, that's a ton. It's like, so the school identity is that, and I'm just like, la 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 la. No, but okay, I will just go and perform in the plays or work backstage. I'm not gonna do any sports. I'm not going to participate in your like sports days, or what was it? There was like gladiator days where they'd go and like put on inflatable suits and play. Oh, and like, it's so interesting how so many of the traditions at the school were very physical too. So, the school, it's a high-end school. It's just what it is. But it's on a lake. And for any of the grade 12 students, when they finish their last exam, the tradition is to run down the hill and jump in the lake, which I obviously did not do. But it was very much okay, this is something else I'm not participating. And at the time, I think I self-wrote that narrative to be like, I'm choosing not to participate in this. But it was also like, I happened to be one of the very first person who was done with exams. So I just very quietly did not do it. But it was another way in which I was just actively taken out of the equation, and I know they still do it. It's what they promote every year. And and having that conversation with the current headmistress about the motto, at first she was super excited, and then the second conversation, clearly she'd been talked down by people. But it was very much oh well, yes, but we're not sure what changes we could be making, or oh, maybe you could join a committee. I'm I'm not doing unpaid work for you, so no. Goodbye.
No, I already consulted and told you what was wrong.
Yeah,
that's exactly. Already free work. What are you talking about?
Yep. Yeah. So it was that's got me thinking on a lot of things. It's even the places where a boarding school like this is you're paying for access to, it does require that financial position. And even in those situations where you're paying a shit ton of money to access something, they're still not accessible and comfortable and stuff. So it's just okay, it's funny how, this is something that's sort of always at the back of my mind. It's funny how sort of luxury tends to be described as something you can pay for, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can access it. So that's one that sort of rattles around my head every so often. And of course you get it with travel and hotel experiences and I mean, even in flight, it's just like there's so many things that, sure, you could have all the money in the world and be disabled, but that doesn't mean you're going to have an accessible experience. It might be more accessible for sure. Like luxury does pay something, but it's like a lot of the time you're still barred out from a lot of experiences.
Is it bad that my first thought went to healthcare?
Oh, well.
That's pretty pathetic. Hate that.
Nope.
Gotta love the United States.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that is a really interesting take that I've not heard laid out like that before, but is so important to put out there for so many reasons, because, you know, there's a lot of privilege, as we've already discussed, within the disability community. Like, there's varying levels of disability, there's varying levels of backgrounds and experiences, financial, like, stability, all of that. And I think it's often just like, oh, well, just pay for that. Like, people just like, it's a flippant response. And I'm like, well, sometimes that's not even enough. Like, that's like bare minimum. And
yeah.
Do you have that money? Because I don't have that money.
No, exactly. And I mean, it's interesting you talk about healthcare and how Canada's touted as like, oh, universal access to healthcare. Yay. I mean, yeah, that doesn't mean doctors' offices are accessible all the time. Like, I have been left on like examination tables because there was no one to help me get down. Like, I've had to have my poor husband came and do a pap smear test with me once because he was the only one who could get me onto the table, and then he stood in the corner looking away.
Oh God. And I'm
like, I don't want that in my marriage. Thank you. It's like,
we need some mystery here.
Yeah. So it's just like, yeah, these things that are touted as either like, yes, you can access them with a ton of financial support, or if you can access them because they're universally accessible to everyone, is like, let's, like, you need to dive into it further, because it's not always the case.
As somebody who has lived in both UK, US, experienced two completely different healthcare systems, they're both garbage. They're both garbage. I'll say it. I say it all the time. I had a terrible experience with the NHS. I did. It was not a good time. It was constant waiting. It was making me worse before I got better. And then, like, it was a bad experience. I can recognize that it's still preferable in many ways to what we have here in the US, because it does provide like free healthcare. Like, that's a dream for so many Americans who can't access healthcare, period. But it's just, there's got to be something in between. There's got to be a solution. I don't know what it is. It's not my job. It's above my pay grade. But somebody's got to come up with it.
It feels like it needs to be. It's interesting in Canada because we are seeing, like, our public healthcare systems are cracking, and we have the right wing really pushing, like, privatization of a lot of healthcare. So we're in an interesting time. And, like, our federal election is coming up this year. So we'll see where we land.
I wish you the best of luck.
Yeah. We had our provincial ones probably November. No, I missed it. Anyway, we had our provincial ones last year, and it was, like, dangerously close to being a right-wing government. And I was like, okay. So, and, like, we're British Columbia. We're meant to be sort of the West Coast la-di-da folks, and still. So, we'll see. It's a fun time.
Well, again, it's Inauguration Day. I get it. We are...
I don't need to tell you. I really don't.
We're here. We're out here just trying to survive, truly, on a day like today.
Yeah.
But I do look at the clock right now, and we've been speaking for close to an hour, which is wild. But to be mindful of your time, I want to get to my 4 questions that I ask every guest.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Something that, again, ties this whole podcast together is themes of rejection, discrimination, being told no, failure, whatever, what have you. when you're feeling rejected, when you're feeling down, what is a song that you can put on that will instantly make you feel like an inch better? Maybe not all the way better. Maybe you're not up and shaking your ass and dancing around, but like you are feeling just like elevated.
Okay. So I'm part of a choir here in Vancouver. So usually any of the songs that we've sung with choir will like get me going, because singing to me is like a therapeutic act. But if I think of like my karaoke song, it's like "Don't Stop Believing" by Journey. So
Wait, I love Journey. Love Journey so much. Yes.
Yeah. It's such a pump up song. So that would probably be one.
10 out of 10. 10 out of 10 response. I also did choir in college, so I can really appreciate a fun choral moment for sure.
Yeah. It's one of my favorite like community experiences here in the city, and I took a break for 6 months and I missed it a lot, so I'm really glad to be back now.
Well, I'm glad you're back. I agree that singing is a great therapy. It's a great way to feel your feelings. I used to say this. I think performing in general is, to be fair.
Yeah.
I did dance for 13 years growing up, and like that was like a big one for me for feeling my teenage angst.
We need to.
Oh, yeah. It's a vessel for that, for sure. Next question. What is something or some activity that you would put in your rejection rescue kit? So once you've been rejected, something that you would do to start making yourself feel better.
Interesting. It'd probably be going to like a favorite recipe or something and cooking it. Oh, we've got a dog visit. Sorry.
A dog visit? Oh, Access Denied loves a dog. Dogs are always welcome here.
Well, I'll see if he's open to being on camera for a sec. There we go. There's Alfie. Yeah, there's Alfie. Hi, you say hi.
Alfie. Oh my God. Hello. For those of you who are tuned into the video, you are winning right now.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a baby. He's my little lap dog.
I'm obsessed. I am absolutely obsessed. Thank you, Alfie, for coming on the podcast. You're welcome. You're welcome anytime. Oh my God. Okay, I love a recipe though. That's fun.
Yeah, I mean, cooking for me, like I don't want to try something new, because trying something new will stress me out and like get me agitated, and especially if it's a hot stove next to me, it's just like it's not the vibe. You can ask my husband when he tries to approach me and I'm trying something new. It's like no. But yeah, going back to like a banana bread or my mom's lasagna or something that just feels familiar, I think it's just like a good way for me to like regulate my system.
I love that. And I also love that the two things that you said are like comfort foods too, like 100%.
Yeah, you gotta eat it too.
Gotta eat. Oh, obviously. Cooking for me personally is not a good time. It's a stressful time. So the actual eating of it would be my like
your comfort.
My moment of comfort. Yes. But I love that so much. That's great. Yeah. Up next for my questions. What is the last thing that you did scared?
The last thing that I did scared. In early December, leading into the holidays, I told a group of my clients that I was dropping them, and my freelance clients, and that I was going to prioritize seated perspectives more. And yeah, it was a big day. Because I love all my clients. Like, I've got great relationships, and I think that's been like the thing I can hang my hat on in terms of my freelance work to date. But I think the really cool thing out of that was that they all responded so beautifully and so encouragingly, and like I know they're all there just watching me do the thing. So yeah, it's always, of course, always nice to know that if I ever wanted or needed to, I can always go back. But yeah, it was quite scary to like sever that connection in the sense of like income potential. But it's really freed me up to spend more time on doing stuff I'm really keen to play with and try out.
First of all, congratulations. That's a huge
Thank
step
you.
towards like your goals and your dreams.
Yeah.
And I think that that's an important like milestone in so many ways. Also, I think the fact that they responded so well is clearly a testament to not just the work that you've done, but clearly the relationships that you've built. So a huge congratulations on how that went then. That's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah.
Final question for you today. What is the last piece of advice you would leave with our listeners here?
I think the thing that I lean on a lot and that I want people to do more is to trust their instinct. Like, I think I said it when I was talking about the post that I wrote on LinkedIn. It's like, flukes don't just happen. Like, I don't think there's a real thing as a fluke. Like, if you're doing things and people are listening and people are paying attention, I think it's worth paying attention to that. And if something that you've done or tried feels good or feels aligned, then listen to that too. Like, stay open to the information your body is giving you, your instinct is giving you, your soul is giving you, and then follow that. Like, in any way that you're able, in any way that you feel safe to do so, just follow it.
That is so beautiful. What a wonderful nugget of wisdom. That's what I call all of these like little moments throughout the episodes. But what a beautiful nugget of wisdom to end on today. Allie, this has been such a joy getting to know you, hearing your story, and ultimately just like having a chat. I feel like it was a good chat today. So thank you so much. Where can everybody find you?
Yeah, so I show up primarily on Seated Perspectives on Instagram. So that's at seated, not seated, as a lot of people seem to think. But seated as in seated down .perspectives. And yeah, anything else you can find from there. And yeah, that's where you'll see me.
Amazing. Everything will be linked down in the show notes, y'all. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Allie, thank you so much for being here. And I will see y'all next week. Bye. And that concludes another episode of Access Denied. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you like this week's episode, be sure to hit that subscription button and notification bell here on YouTube, or go check us out on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss another episode. We have so much exciting content coming out for season 2. You're not going to want to miss it. I'd like to give a huge shout out to JP Warner Sound for dropping this sick beat that you're listening to right now. And finally, if you'd like to rep your love of Access Denied, you now can with our very exciting merch line featuring a very special Access Denied mug so that you can sip your morning tea while you listen to me spill the accessibility. Anyways, friends, thank you so much once again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Bye!